Hey everybody, this is episode 7 of the Latent Force Prepared Defensive Action podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the value of proper trigger control, so stick around.
Mission 3, 2, 1.
This is the Latent Force Prepared Defensive Action podcast. We believe there's no defensive situation so bad that your lack of training can't make it worse. We're on a mission to cut the crap in the firearms industry and bring you topics and discussions that are designed to make you a more informed and effective gunfighter. If it has to do with alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and everything else, we're going to talk about it. Guys, gals, and submarine racers, here are your hosts, Jay Eisenecke and Mike Garza. All right, well, thanks for joining us again for another episode of the Latent Force Prepared Defensive Action podcast. Today, I have my favorite co-host, Mike Garza, with me. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing pretty good. Wait, am I really your favorite?
Well, yeah. I have a really long list of favorite co-hosts. And it's pretty long.
I think you're
me
fitting.
And you. Yeah, it's me, and then it's you. Yeah. So hey, one of the really cool things about having a podcast at latentforce.com where you can send your questions or comments about any of our podcast episodes, where we'd love to hear from you. You can say, hey, maybe you ought to do an episode about this, or you can comment about some of the stuff that we said, right, wrong, or indifferent. But I wanted to share.
Apparently. Did I beat you to the punchline?
You did. Thanks a lot. So if you remember, there was this little kid. His name was Noah Ritter, and he's 5 years old, and he's at the Wayne County Fair. And they interview him about, hey, about the rides. And he's like, well, apparently my grandfather likes to, and apparently the ride is supposed to spin around. So I was sent a quick note that said in one of our prior episodes where we were talking about the kid with the gun on the table during the Zoom call.
The red boxing one.
Yeah. Apparently, I said apparently a million times during that little segment. So they made sure to send me the link to that thing. So I'll put it up so everybody can look at it, but it was pretty funny.
And we can all make fun of Jay.
Yeah. So that's every time, I guess, maybe going forward, we can turn this into a drinking game. And every time you hear me say apparently, you just have to take a shot. Does that sound fair?
Either that or we can eat Tide Pods, one or the other.
That'll work. Yep. Unfortunately, that would limit the number of listeners that we have. So, well,
we're probably going to get sued by Tide now or something.
Yeah, something like
it's
that.
One way to become famous.
That's right. Make ourselves famous. Hey, but if you remember, it wasn't too long ago. Last week, I guess it was, maybe it was a week before, went and I traveled to Phoenix and spent some time. I like to take in the classes whenever I can. I needed to renew my CCW in Arizona. And so I thought, what the heck, I might as well, instead of just filling in the paperwork, I might as well take a class, try to stay up on, the laws if they change, which doesn't appear that they really did, but it was a good class. Our friend Dave Laird over at Dynamic Combat Solutions put on the class, and it was a nice 4-hour class. So we had a good time. But one of the things that he brought up in there, if you remember, Mike, is that he brought up a police1.com article that had to do with how often should you be shooting. And one of the things he brought up in there was that the suspects have revealed, this is a study that they did on Police One, was suspects revealed that they practiced on average 23 times per year with their handgun. And I was actually kind of shocked about that. I don't know about you, but that was a bit surprising to me.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is then maybe I'm going to beat you to the punch again. But not only that, when they practice, it's not like they go to the range and they give their ID card to the front counter. They just shoot in the alley in the back. They shoot at tin cans. They shoot, it's amazing at where they shoot because they don't care because they're bad guys.
Right. Well, I mean, there's probably some truth to that. And I think what kind of the point was is that if they go and they shoot 50 rounds and they get a box of ammo and they go shoot the 50 rounds and you do that times 23 times a year, they're shooting what is that? Quick math is 1,150 rounds a year. So I guess the point to it is to say, well, how many rounds are we, as armed citizens, how many times are we going out and how many rounds are we shooting? Now, obviously it's like your point is quality, right? I mean, I could go out and shoot 1,000 rounds in a quick afternoon, but it's about quality, not quantity. But I think it just kind of reinforces the necessity of it. And so a little bit further in there is that, as I read a little further, is the interesting thing in their study is that in interviewing the suspects is that they believe police officers are trained between 2 and 3 times per week with their firearms. And so it raises a question that I have.
Funny.
Yeah, you want to talk about getting a good laugh. So here's the question that I have for you then, Mike, is how many times a year do you think they actually train?
I happen to know that maybe twice a year.
Yeah, and I'm going to say that's on a good year. I'm going to say the only time, and we make this point whenever we did the requal, is this is not training. This is just a requalification. So that doesn't even count.
Yeah, that's exactly why I say that, because what would happen is all of my buddies would be like, hey, I got qual tomorrow. Can we go shoot right now? So that was their one time of practice. And then the second time was the actual physical qual, which is, like you say, not practice at all.
Right. And then when they don't pass, then they go out and they shoot again in practice so they can just make the minimum qualification. So yes, they might actually get 2 in a year, and that's within about a 2 or 3 day period before and after the qualification that's set up. So I just thought it was kind of funny that that's what they think. Now, here's the other thing is that on top of that, how many times do you think that officers take advantage? Because you and I know we were firearms instructors for 7 years with the sheriff's office, and how many times do you think anybody took advantage of that free training that was available through the office?
Well, the funny part is that the volunteers took advantage of it more than the cops did.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and at that point, even it wasn't enough. I mean, it would be hard to get a class full of even the free training. So, but the interesting thing about it is that, there's all the post certification, which is set up what the training is and how it's supposed to be. And I guess it's kind of this part to me is important because of the kind of the culture that we're in, this cancel culture, the defund the police type of thing that's going on right now, is that post sets up, they determine what the training really is, because they say you have to do this many hours, shoot this many rounds, that type of thing. And so that is really designed based on what they think is the absolute minimum. And then they can't just throw out a list of required training that, is days and days and days, because then it rolls into the budget constraints on the agencies that are supposed to provide the training, right?
Absolutely. So there again, you talk about defund the police. What's the first thing they're going to cut out? Training money.
Training. Yeah. Companies do it. I mean, that's the first thing that goes is training. I mean, that's training, travel, all that kind of stuff. So, it's just one of those things to think about is that we obviously need people to get their training. And so kind of got this thing going for me was to start in a couple of different ways was, we talk about understanding what it is that we do and what the training is and what our skill levels are, but how often do we actually think about the criminals and what they're actually doing in their training? And that's why this kind of started it for me. So how well do you think the average honest citizen knows their enemy, i.e. the criminal? How well do you think they know him?
You really want me to say that out loud?
Well, yeah.
I don't think they know them at all.
Right. And so how much time?
Zero.
Yeah. So how much time do you think they spend actually trying to study or learn something about it? Because the reality is anything that has to do with criminology is pretty boring. But how long do you think the average honest citizen spends actually looking at that?
How long is a show on Live PD for A&E?
That's about it, right? Yeah, that's what they think they know. And so most average people that are just your citizen gun owners are not going to come in contact or have any dealings with criminals. And so both you and I, having spent some time in law enforcement, is that we have, unfortunately, you have to interact with those people, and you do have that, and you understand the way that they do things, but most people don't. And so I think that most people want to know, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me at any time, is how likely are they going to be victimized? Right? I mean, that's one of the things that they want to know. What are the characteristics of their attackers? Like, I mean, what are the type of things that they need to be looking out for? And then if you're going to be robbed, are you going to be robbed with a bat, a pipe, a knife, a gun? I mean, what type of thing are they going to have to deal with? And then finally, I think probably the most important thing is when and where does crime occur? And I think those are like the four most important things that an average citizen would want to know, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll bring in two events in my life. I've been robbed twice at gunpoint. Both times I was inebriated. I was in the Navy. Imagine that, inebriated and Navy, both in the same sentence. And then I was robbed both times, once in Millington, Tennessee, and I can't remember. Oh, the other one was down in Memphis. So the first time I was robbed coming out of a bar for $2.50. And also, though, what they wanted was my military ID, because I guess they can falsify those and they can get into the commissary and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And then the other time I was also robbed was down at Memphis. Same thing. I was behind a bar. I had to drain the lizard. Instead of using the bathroom, I thought outside back alley was a better idea. And then I got robbed again. So both times I wasn't aware of my surroundings. I was in a foreign element, right? I didn't know the ins and out of that area. And of course, the bad guys knew both of those. So they had quick exits. They knew what to look for. Obviously, I didn't have a description of the two. And again, I got lucky. I mean, I got away with my life. They could have easily just been like, no witnesses, and been the end of it. So that's easily two examples right there.
Sure. And I think that probably one of the important things is, as I was thinking, and one of the important things is a true thinking gunfighter, or somebody who's interested in their own self-defense, is to understand what it is that the criminals are going to be using. So at least because to me, if we go, you always hear the saying, right, is don't take a knife to a gunfight. Well, if you're going to go to a gunfight, you want to at least have the same level of force or greater than the people that you're having to interact with. And so I was deep into this really exciting, as into one of these Department of Justice Bureau of Statistics, looking through all that, because I sent that out on the website about, somebody asked a question about where we get all our information and they question it. So I'm in there looking through. And one of the interesting things is most FBI and DOJ reports track firearms, and knives to kind of how they're being used. But some of the stuff is they don't tell you what type of firearm, like, is it a revolver? Is it semi-automatic? What caliber it is? What type of ammo they use? And I think a lot of that stuff is important to know, is what the criminal is using, so you can at least have better information. So I think that's probably one of the things that it would be really important is being in law enforcement, formerly in law enforcement, whatever it is, you kind of have a better idea what some of those trends are and some of the things that people are doing. So I'm going to throw a couple of things. I jotted a couple of things down to me, and you can tell me if you disagree. So most firearms that people use when doing crime is a handgun.
Correct.
Okay. And it's mostly going to be semi-autos and revolvers.
Correct.
Okay. Next thing, most firearms are common brands such as Glock, Smith & Wesson, Ruger, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. The majority don't or have limited functionality, missing mags, or broken parts.
That one I couldn't tell you. The first time was a revolver, nickel plated, and then the second one was a Glock.
Okay. But most of the time, we always told everybody, hey, when you pull these things out and you take a gun off of somebody and you're going to go ahead and clear the gun, it's even more important to point that thing in the safe direction, because Lord knows what kind of modifications or what they've done to these guns, because you just don't know. So it's one of those things it's probably been jacked with in some way or another, or it just doesn't work. I mean, they bought it on the street. It's stolen. Who knows? So most of the time you're going to find that stuff is that's the condition that they're in. I would say that the slim majority, when you take them off of those, when you take them off of the criminals, is that the slim majority are fully loaded. The rest of them are going to be kind of partially partially loaded, or they're going to have wrong caliber ammunition in them. Yeah.
And actually, to take a quick playbook out of something recently, if you remember that guy that was in Seattle, the Marine that took away whoever that guy was that stole the AR out of the police car. If you notice that clip, that's the first thing he did, is he grabbed the AR, obviously had the guy at gunpoint, and then once he felt that he was kind of safe, he cleared the AR, dropped the mag, he cleared the AR and just shouldered it, because again, he doesn't know what kind of condition that thing is in, and he didn't want to take the chance. He knew that his firearm was good to go.
Sure. And here's another thing, is that I think that overwhelmingly, especially now versus maybe even 5 or 10 years ago, is overwhelmingly the caliber of guns that are out there is 9mm.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah. And most of them, when they are loaded and they have ammunition in them, they are just full metal jacket, ball ammo, target stuff.
I think in that Police One article that you were referencing, I believe that in there they might say, I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay. I'll keep going, and you'll remember. I'm sure you will. So again, getting into some statistics, is that the U.S. Department of Justice shows that over 80% of victims that were shot by handguns. So if you're a victim of crime where you're actually shot, well, here's a staggering thing though, is that same report says that barely more than 10% of victims were shot or shot at, and less than 1% resulted in an actual gunshot wound. So that tells you how small the percentage, even though they're used in crime 80% of the time, only 1% of the people that are actually victims of the crime have actually been shot with the actual gun. So to me, that says, if you take all the stuff that we just talked about, right, Mike, which is the condition of the gun, whether they actually work or not, whether they have the right ammo in them, and you're saying, hey, they're just emptying magazines out in the alleyway or whatever, supposedly practicing, is that the likelihood of you, and their statistics tell you, is that the likelihood of actually getting shot by these people is pretty low.
Right. That's what I was about to say. You reminded me with a wound. They're probably not going out and buying hollow points either. They're just taking those practice rounds, and then that's what they're using. So whenever you see these gang fights or gun battles going on, and you see, oh yeah, I've gotten shot 6 times, I've gotten shot 8 times, it's because they're not using hollow points. They're using training rounds, and those training rounds aren't meant to expand and destroy tissue and disrupt body functions. They're just meant to pass through the paper target. So another reason why they just, you see these guys that have been in jail and they've had multiple gunfights, and it's because they've been shot with these types of rounds.
Now, and here's the other thing, and I would love to be able to cite this source, but I remember reading an article, and it stuck with me, but I don't remember. It was an emergency room doctor back east somewhere. One of the larger hospitals might be Cedars-Sinai or something like that, and he's a trauma surgeon, and he said his experience having worked in the emergency room is that if you show up with a gunshot wound at the emergency room and you are alive, based on all of the technology that they have and the advances in medicine, you have a 95% chance of surviving those gunshot wounds. And I thought that was pretty telling. I mean, even if you do get shot, the likelihood is that somebody's going to take you to the hospital. You're going to survive. And that's true for the criminals too. I mean, they don't just, that's what, to your point, is you got plenty of guys that are in jail that have gunshot wounds, and they're doing fine. And that's just kind of the truth.
Look at Gabby Giffords, right? In the head, and she's alive today.
Yep.
I get it. Her quality of life is different now, but she's still alive.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think so. It kind of brings to me is this whole thing is I think that the important thing that we need to think about as if we're thinking gunfighters and anybody that's just going to be carrying concealed is that the thing that you need to think about in my personal opinion, just my humble opinion, is that you need to carry a gun that is the same or larger than what the criminals are carrying. And right now, the majority, I'm gonna go out on a limb, and I feel very confident with it. And the majority of them are 9mm.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And the person who said that was Dr. DiMaio, DIMAIO, and that was from a article back in the New York Times. I'll give that to Jay so you can post that.
Oh, awesome! You found it. So I was right. It was 95%.
95%. It says, it quotes. Oh, no, I just lost the link here because it quotes that if a gunshot victim's heart is still beating upon arrival at a hospital, there's a 95% chance of survival.
Oh, man, I love it when I remember stuff like that. But that's a huge thing to remember is that, we say stay in the fight. And, in Hollywood, it seems like you're going to get shot and you're just, you're going to just fall down and it's one shot and done. And that's all it takes. Right. But the reality is that you can fight through all this stuff. And so that's the important thing is to remember is that if they are using, guns that aren't working well, those type of things, and the chances of them getting the shots off, if they're accurate, it's more than likely going to be, just ball ammo that's going to pass straight through. And unless they're super lucky, it's more than likely that it is going to be, you're going to be shot, but it's not going to be doing the damage like you said. So to me is that you should carry, these are some of the things that we need to think about is you need to carry quality, fully functioning, and loaded guns, okay? Because the majority of the criminals don't.
Yeah, we used to talk about this in our classes all the time. You should be doing your due diligence. This gun is there to protect you at your worst possible time in life. And if you haven't checked your ammunition one by one, dropping it in the barrel, clean your gun after all, again, all of these factors play in. So if you haven't been to a structured class where they kind of go through the motion, or you did go through a structured class and they didn't cover these topics, you're missing out and you need to seek qualified instruction.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the other thing is too, one last little bit on this, and then we'll move on. But I think that the other thing to remember, to your point about the ammunition, is that you should carry high quality personal protection ammo because the criminals don't. And if you're going to get one round off and they're going to get one round off, and you hit them with a high quality personal defense round versus target ammo, the difference in the effectiveness of that round, it's huge. It's a major difference. And so I understand is that it might cost twice or three times the amount of practice ammo, but that's the stuff that you want to have in your gun. And each year you should be investing in that ammo. And when you get the new box of that ammo that you're going to put in your everyday carry gun, is that you need to go out and practice with the rounds from the previous year, so you're familiar with how it feels to shoot those defensive rounds, because it's going to feel a little different.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the reason why the FBI always goes back to the ballistic tests in that gelatin. If you guys have never seen anything like that, just go to YouTube or somewhere and type in FBI ballistics gel test or something, and you'll see that round expand in that gelatin. That's what it's supposed to do, not just zip right through.
Exactly. And we can get, and there's plenty of studies on effectiveness of calibers and whether you need the 45 versus the 40 versus the 9. And, that's a topic for a different one. But my point is that you should be carrying, good quality ammunition, a good quality gun that's at least the same size or larger than what the criminals are carrying. So anywho, I just kind of got on that thing, and it just kind of, after that class, it seemed like that was some of the stuff that, that's a problem with anybody that's putting on these CCW courses, is that, and especially when they're only, the minimum that's required, which is what most, which I found is most people can only sit through the, 3-4 hours and they're done anyways. But you miss some of these conversations about these things. And I think it's really important, like you said, to take additional training, not just the CCW classes. So. But, as I was going through our Facebook page, the Latent Force Facebook page, I happened to come across something from a while back. It was back in 2016. And this had to do with trigger control. And when I did this video, I was thinking to myself when I did it is that I think that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to disagree with me, or think that maybe that I'm, went off the deep end here. Is, I know a lot of the times we have done training where, we try to make sure that people have proper trigger finger placement and kind of drill that into people, right? I mean, during the academies, we spend a lot of time the first day or two just trying to make sure that people understand where to even put their finger on the trigger, right?
Absolutely. Trigger control and, just basic grip. That's it.
Yeah. So the fundamentals, it's important to just a refresh of the fundamentals is obviously grip, sight alignment, trigger control, stance, breathing, and follow through. Those are the 6 fundamentals of marksmanship. And so we've always done where you teach is we try to make sure that they either have the first pad on the trigger, or if they got a double action where they're going to have that power crease, the first crease in your finger is on the trigger. And you spend a lot of time and it's pinch the finger and put the pain on the trigger, that type of thing. And I was thinking to myself that what kind of started this whole thing was, we do that a lot in the very beginning. And eventually at some point we just stop talking about it because everybody should have advanced themselves enough to where we don't have to tell them that anymore. It's just kind of automatic. And so where I see a lot of times people will say, hey, I'm starting to shoot low left. And low left, the first correction to that is going to, we all know what that's going to be. Mike, what are we going to do when we correct somebody that's shooting low left as a right-handed shooter?
No idea. Oh, well, if you're barely putting your finger on the trigger, I don't know. I don't pay too much attention to those charts. So what Jay's referring to, and I'm sure you'll link it later on, is those little charts that tell you if you're shooting low left, you're doing this, or if you're shooting high, you're probably healing the gun. I don't subscribe to any of that. It's usually a combination of a lot of things.
Yeah, the charts are a great thing. They tell you, hey, low left is you got your trigger fingers placed here and you're pushing it. And you're going to see a lot of the responses or the answers on those charts is your finger is doing something, or you're milking the gun or whatever, and your grip is doing this. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, how is it possible? Right? Because there's a difference. We teach, and everybody does, fine motor skills versus gross motor skills. And fine motor skills are going to be the little teeny tiny ticky-tacky stuff, moving switches, knobs, all that kind of stuff. Finger on the trigger, pressing the trigger, that's a fine motor skill. And then you have gross motor skills, which are big dumb muscles that are swinging, running, that kind of stuff, jumping. So my question to myself was, I was sitting there going, how is it possible that the little teeny pad on your finger that is a fine motor skill has enough power to overpower all of the gross motor skill, big dumb muscles that you have, that is supposed to be providing all of the support and the base for absorbing recoil and everything else? How is that even possible? Right? So
apparently it's not.
Right. Well, it is. The reason that it's possible is because everything else is breaking down. Right. Is that all the stuff that if you're not getting the good grip and your big dumb muscles aren't giving you a proper grip on the gun, then obviously your little trigger finger is going to be able to start affecting how it is that you're firing on. And that's where your accuracy, it just falls apart, is that the basics of putting all this stuff together and forming a great foundation and the backstop for all the recoil and everything is just falling apart. And so now that slight is, because I don't know. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but I find it really hard to believe is that, especially if it's on the pad, in the center of the pad on the first finger, first knuckle of your finger, how is that overriding your chest, shoulder, and back muscles?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I tend to agree somewhat, but this is the way I look at it. If you go ahead and put your finger, your pointer finger right on top of your thumb, and then try and push your thumb straight back. You notice that you can't. You bend it one way or the other, or you're not perfectly centered on the top of your thumb. So essentially, that's exactly what happens on the gun. If you watch very carefully in video, like you film yourself, you'll notice that every time you go to press the trigger on your gun, and you over press, or you come back too far, and you're moving too quick, that's where you're getting all that movement. And you would think, like you're saying, that, man, there's no way that it could move the gun that much, but it truly does. And you might not see it at 3 yards, 5 yards, right? But where does everyone always have their problems? Back at distance, because you're trying to concentrate so hard instead of looking at your front sight. So that's one of those big things, right? They say when you're getting older, I don't know if that's true because I don't ever get old, but what happens is you're supposed to do a figure 8. And then every time the front sight crosses at the 2 points, that's when you're supposed to press the trigger. I mean, doesn't that sound odd, right? Same thing, right? When you're teacupping the gun, right? I can shoot really good when I teacup the gun, but what can't I do? I can't do follow-up shots real good, right? So
right. Yeah. And I mean, and that's kind of the thing, right? Is that you want to make sure that you've got those quick follow-up shots. And so the recovery from the recoil that's why you have to have that good grip, and you've set up that base for you to be able to do it. And so if you're not doing any of that, then, because I would counter to that is that if you're teacupping the gun, I would think that yes, at that point, because you're not doing anything, is that now that it is possible for your trigger finger to overpower everything because you don't have anything there supporting it. I mean, you're not using anything except for this. You're just holding the gun in the palm of your hand. I mean, you're not doing anything. So that's when I think it's so important, is that all those things, the grip and everything else is so important, because, you don't want to have these accuracy problems just because of where you put your finger on the trigger.
Right.
So,
and that's why that stupid chart really doesn't translate, in my opinion.
Right. No, I agree. That's what everybody does. They get it and they look at it and they try to get the answer to it, but it doesn't tell you is that, hey, by the way, is your hand, your primary firing grip, your not your support hand, but your primary hand, is it all the way up on the back strap of the gun, as far up as it can possibly go? Because that's the other place that we see it, right? As you see the gap, the light between the gun and the top of their hand. So, because people are either afraid of the slide bite or whatever it might be, but it's usually just a crappy grip. And so all of those things, have to go into it. Because if we're talking about the fundamentals, and what is so important is that obviously trigger control, and you have to, in order for the gun to go off, you have to press the trigger, and in order for you to hit whatever you're aiming at, you have to have the proper sight alignment. So if anything that you do to affect that sight alignment, obviously then changes the accuracy. So and if you don't fire the gun, it doesn't go off. So that's why those two things are so important. But it was just a thing. I don't want to get anybody upset. Don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I just, I saw it, reminded me that I kind of was a little concerned that people might call me crazy when I made that video, but I don't know. Nobody did. So I guess that's okay. People call me crazy for other things.
Apparently they were okay with that.
And apparently,
I am not going to let that go.
Apparently, my grandfather says that while they're watching the Powerball, and a little kid, man, I'm going to post that up because it says there's like 34 million views of his interview. So I'm thinking that everybody knows who he is, and so everybody, if you're not laughing right now, then just stop listening. I don't know what else.
That was my first time seeing it. I've never seen that one before.
You never saw that, really?
No.
Oh man, I'm so glad I shared that.
How about the little kid with the turtle face? Do you remember that one?
I do not.
Oh, that's another good one to look up. Everyone look up turtle face.
You sure? Is that going to be a clean lookup?
Yeah, it's a little kid with a turtle face. What are you talking about?
Okay, I'm just making sure, because sometimes you put a thing in it seems fairly like nothing's going to happen, and you type it in, and then it comes up on YouTube, and it's some sort of you don't want to talk about it, not safe for work type of stuff.
Okay, that's kind of weird. Don't look at turtle face on Urban Dictionary. I'll find the correct link.
Okay. whatever Mike just said, do not listen to that. Anyways, now when you say turtle, the first thing I think of, just to go, when you say that is, well, actually, there's two things that I think of. And no, it's only one.
Okay, I found it. It's zombie.
Okay,
zombie kid likes turtles. That's it.
Zombie kid likes turtles.
Yeah,
now
that's the one. All right, sorry. What were you saying?
If we get to a point where you're actually talking, then I'll be able to look it up and see what that actually says.
I don't like talking because then everyone, yells at you and they send comments in like you're saying apparently too much, so it's
apparently that happens.
Well, it's kind of a good thing though. At least people are listening to us. So,
well, yeah. And that is true. And that one or two people that are out there listening on a regular basis, we sure appreciate it. And they didn't hurt my feelings too bad. But no, when I think of turtle I think of Dana Carvey in the movie Master of Disguise. It's quiet. I can hear a pin drop out there in the audience. And when he's dressed up the Master of Disguise and he dresses up in a turtle costume and he goes, turtle, turtle. No, nobody.
No, you white people listen to some weird stuff.
I'm gonna post it up. I'm gonna put the link on there because that's what I think of when everybody's saying turtle. That's the first thing I think of. And apparently I'm the only one that ever watched that movie. So, well, we teased this. Moving on, we did tease this last episode that we were going to go and talk about something else besides just guns. And we changed the format and we said, hey, we're supporting the ATF, which is alcohol, tobacco, firearms. And our part of it is the E, which is not explosives, although we like explosives, but it's everything else. So ours is, we're going to talk about alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and everything else. And so here we wanted to talk today was about whiskey. Now, Mike, I know you're locked up in the, in the compound and, you're on call, so you're not enjoying your Crown Royal, but I got in. I was like, why is it that Mike likes Crown Royal so much? So here I got a little bit of a discussion about whiskey. So how familiar, Mike, do you think you are on a, if we were to ask you a bunch of questions, how well do you think you would do if I asked you a bunch of questions about whiskey?
Only if it's Jack Daniels, because I took the tour.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Really? You were in Tennessee and you took the tour.
So I'll just quick war story. One day, my buddy, who I guess his dad worked for Southwest Airlines for 20 years, and then they get tickets all the time. He's like, hey man, drop what you're doing. Let's go to Tennessee. I'm like, okay. So literally we got on a plane that night at midnight. We were the only people on the plane. We flew there and we're like, okay, we're here now. What do we do? He's like, I don't know. Let's just go tour the Jack Daniels distillery. I'm like, oh, I like it. Let's go. They're in a dry county. I did not know that. You cannot drink Jack Daniels right there on the facility. You can taste it and pretend to spit it out. But that's it. You can't drink it there. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same thing in Kentucky, which is they have a lot of that stuff too. And, in Kentucky is, so before we get into that, but yeah, the big difference is that I think that everybody has this, again, I'm going to say is I'm not an expert. I know enough to be dangerous. And so I shared only the stuff that I do know, that I feel confident that I actually do know. And so the first thing is that I was taught is that whiskey is spelled different. And it's spelled different in a couple different ways. Is that it's spelled with an E, which is the KEY or KY. And do you know why the difference is between the KY and the KEY?
Educate me, mon frere.
Oh man, awesome! I know something. Okay, so if the whiskey is made in a country that has the letter E in it, it will be spelled with KEY. If it isn't, it's spelled with a KY. So, Scotland, where they make Scotch, Canada, where they make Canadian whiskey, Japan, where they make their whiskey, it's all spelled with a KY. But if it's made, now the influence in America was from Ireland. Ooh, it has an E in it, and it came here, and it came to the United States, which has an E in it. So whiskey here and whiskey in Ireland is spelled with a KEY. So make sure you spell your stuff right. There you go.
For the record, I just fact checked him, and it is correct. I went to the Crown Royal site. No kidding. Whiskey is not with an E. And then I went to the Jack Daniel's site, and it is with an E. I am impressed.
Yeah. Thank you. So here's the thing. Now, so for me is that I'm a bourbon guy, and for a long time I didn't even know that there was. I just thought it was one thing or another. Now, here's the thing though. Okay, I'm a bourbon guy, and you say, well, it doesn't really matter. It's whiskey. Okay, well, there's some truth to that, but the thing you have to remember is bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. And
right.
That's just something that we need to remember. Okay. So bourbon obviously is made in Kentucky. It is made in Bourbon. It started in Bourbon County, which was set up from France. That's kind of where it got all its influence. So that's why Bourbon Street is in New Orleans, is because they used to take it from Kentucky down the Mississippi to New Orleans. And that's kind of how the whole bourbon thing started, because of all the French influences in those areas. So here's another interesting fact. Do you know what the origins of the Kentucky Derby are?
That's when the moonshiners would race, I thought, because of the cops and everything.
Well,
trying to get their liquor across the lines or to their customers without the cops catching them.
No, it goes back further than that. Way back. So they used to take the bourbon down from Kentucky, and they take it into the other rivers there that eventually fed into the Mississippi, and they would take it down. And of course, back then they could get attacked by the Indians that were there, or it could be any of the robbers on the trail. And so they would go on these boats, these flat boats that would take them down to New Orleans, and they'd drop off the bourbon. Well, they couldn't go back up a river, but they knew that all the money that they made going down the river and selling all the bourbon is they had to get it back. They had to get back to Kentucky. So they spent their money on the best, fastest horse to get back to Kentucky. And that's how that started. The Kentucky Derby was they would race their horses back as fast as they could to get back to Kentucky. So there you go.
Interesting.
See? Okay. So anyway, so here's a couple other interesting things, right? So, have you ever heard of bottled in bond?
Nope.
You haven't? Okay. The very first, this is pretty interesting. The very first Consumer Protection Act that went into effect in the United States was the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897. So you'd think it'd have to do with food. You'd have to think it would do about all that kind of stuff, but it didn't. It had to do with whiskey. And so bottled in bond there was all these requirements, which are a bunch of them, but basically, they had to be aged so long. They had to have the name of it stamped into the head of the barrel, had to be made in charred oak, new oak barrels, had to be 3 years or longer, maybe longer. And it's a bunch of these details, right? But that was the one that they started because they used to make this stuff out of vodka. And then they would put shoe polish in it just so it would, and that's the crap that they used to make. So that's why they did this whole thing, is because they wanted to make sure that the whiskey was right. So here's the difference is that it has to be, one of the things is it has to be 100 proof or higher. And so do you know where the whole thing came about, how they came up with proof to verify it?
I used to remember, but I forgot.
Okay. Here's a cool thing. So they would take gunpowder, they would soak it in the alcohol, and if they lit it and it started on fire, right, then that was the proof. And because then it would be, so that had to meet, so it's pretty scientific, right? I mean, there's got to be a bunch of different, think about it, think of how many variables, how much alcohol did you put in it? How much gunpowder was in it? How hot was the match? All that kind of stuff. But basically if it lit, then it was considered, that was the proof to make sure that it was good. And so that's how they came up with the 100 proof. So it was pretty interesting. That any of that kind of stuff, how they came into it. So, but yeah, what is it about for me, what I like about the bourbon is that it's sweeter because it has way more corn in it. So it's like 51% it's required. So it's sweeter because that the sugar, because you get corn syrup. And so it tastes more that way. And I really like the smoky taste that comes from it. What's but you like the Crown Royal, which is like more rye. So it's like, I don't know, sharper. spicy. I don't know what you would use as a term. So what do you like? Why do you like the Crown Royal more?
I can't say that I don't know why I do. It just, so I've had several, and I like, for example, even in the Crown family, like they have an apple, I think is what the one that they just came out with. And my wife got me a bottle of it and I quickly gave it away. Like I did not like the taste, but everything else that they make, I like. They have a bourbon one. They also have a XR, which is extremely rare. That's probably my favorite one. And then just the regular one as well. So
it's just, to me, it's interesting because was considered, especially, and I did just for you I did a little bit of research on Crown Royal. And so because it's Canadian whiskey, is that it was originally considered a rye. And so, they don't have the same, like everybody thinks Scotch is like, oh, it's so regulated in Scotland about how it has to be there and whatever. But actually bourbon is more regulated and Canadian whiskey is not, it's not as regulated. Some of the things that are different about it is that when they mix all the grains together, like when you're making a bourbon, is all that stuff is done and fermented together versus Canadian stuff. They do them like separate and then they blend them together. But, that's why, to me, I'm not a big fan of Crown because it is I don't like any kind of whiskey that's rye. I just think it's I don't know if it's, like I said, it's spicy or sharp or something like that. I don't know. But anyways, Crown Royal is still good stuff. I mean, it's just, I guess it's personal preference. So, but that's just me.
And that really is, I mean, for me, like I said, it's not the scientific version of it or anything. I've tasted stuff all the way across the board. And for whatever reason, that's what my palate likes.
Yeah.
So, and stop palate shaming me.
Palate shaming. That's good. I think we need to start a hashtag.
Oh gosh.
Palate shame. And everybody's going to go, what are you talking about palates? What's wrong with palates? Well, you have the wrong kind, man. Anyways, you don't have oak palates. You only have those cheap pine ones. I don't know. Here we are getting off into the weeds about palates,
again,
but
right.
Hey, so one of the things that is, I'm a big fan of High West. And it's the Campfire whiskey, and and it's made up in Park City in Utah, is where High West whiskey comes from, and they have that Campfire stuff. And it's interesting, is because a lot of people don't like it. When I went up to the tasting up there, they said, yeah, it's not, people just don't like it. It's way too smoky. It's either one of these things, if you love it or you hate it. And everybody else likes the rye. And so it's just, but to me, that stuff is so good. And I think it comes back to the fact that I just like the smoky, like Maker's Mark is good stuff for me. Any of those type of bourbons that are like that, I like.
Now I like Maker's Mark. That's good stuff.
Right. But here's the thing, is that most of those, unless you get the right, they're all, I want to say it was in the 80s. They started changing these things to where they started watering them down to where the proof was lower, because people wanted, they were into the gins and that kind of stuff, and everybody got in these. And so, it got the stigma that whiskey and bourbon was old people stuff. And so to get more mainstream, they started making them lighter colored and watered down. And so the bottled and bond ones are going to be a higher alcohol content. Right. than Makers, because Makers 46 is still, that's only, that's a lower, I think, I don't know for sure, but it's a lower, it's like in the 80s in proof on the Makers 46. So it's a little bit higher, but it isn't 100 proof. And so it's just doesn't have the bite to it because it's not, obviously the alcohol content is not as high, but, yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking of some of those that are pretty good. And I was in California, of all places, and they had a huge whiskey bar where they had, tons of these things that you could sample them all. And it was all pretty yummy. But anyway,
I will no longer do this podcast if you say California again.
California. Well, it was interesting. I mean, I'm like, I go there and they have this huge bar of nothing. It was nothing but whiskey of all the different ones that you could. And actually, I went there with Chris, and it was in his hometown. It was in Penrose. And for some reason I was in that area and for a convention in Santa Rosa. Santa Rosa, Penrose, whatever. It's the same place. Penrose is where American Graffiti was filmed. Anyways, so we went there, and that was a huge. It is this huge bar. It was a lot of good with all that whiskey. So, I don't know. Do you have a bourbon then that you like, or do you not? Is that something that you don't even?
Yeah, I don't
try it.
I've never really. I don't know. Jameson, does that count? No,
oh my God.
That's a
somebody's coming after you for saying that.
Again, I really don't. I guess I like the ones that don't bite. Maybe because I'm a little girl. I don't know. I mean, I'll drink like XO. I'll drink it straight, maybe with a little bit of ice, not much. Jack's. I'll drink Jack's on ice, but most of the time, I like a little bit of Coke in mine. Even what is that? Crow's foot or something? What's the nasty
Old Crow?
stuff? Yeah, Old Crow. That's it.
Old Crow. Yeah.
yeah. I'll even drink that. I don't know.
So one of the good ones that I really like that, and is actually there's two of them that I don't know. It's like, I guess I never really paid attention. So maybe I know it's been around for a long time because of the name, and they've been there for a long time in Kentucky, but is Buffalo Trace and Michter's. And those are two that are really, 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 really good. And I like them a lot. And, I try to mix it up. I don't have, like I said, I don't have too many of the bottled and bond ones because they're pretty strong. Maybe I'm a wimp too. I don't know. But, any of that stuff like the, just higher alcohol content stuff is a little stronger for me.
And Jim Beam too, like even the old stuff. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I get around.
Well, and Jim Beam is the one that actually brought back the revival of the bottled and bond thing. That was their big deal. They went and made a bunch of, took a big risk to go and do that because it was the higher alcohol, and that's not what people were drinking. And so now, it's kind of, I don't know. I don't want to, offend anybody and call anybody the hipsters, but I mean, that's what, now it's got this revival, and that's what people are doing is they're going, hey, I guess I can drink whiskey. It isn't my grandpa's stuff anymore. So they're drinking bourbon and stuff now.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, the bourbon is just, that's what everyone drinks bourbon because that's America's drink. I don't know. Exactly.
So, okay. So I just happen to take the notes here because I know everybody is dying to find out is the bottled and bond. So it is minimum 4 years old, 100 proof bottled, because it'll come out of before it goes into the barrels and aged. It's like 150 proof, something like that.
160.
So yeah, something like that. So it's 100 proof bottled from one season. So it's a vintage. So it's much like wine. One distiller, no blends. So they don't blend different distiller stuff together. They may blend the water, the distilled water to get the proof right.
Right.
You have to list all the ingredients. It has to be in a glass bottle. Must be 51% corn. And
aged for 2 years minimum.
4 years.
Oh, really?
4 years old.
Oh, nice.
Yes. 4 years. So anyways, that is, and then it also had to have, the brand named act was another thing that came up after this. And that meant the heads of the whiskey barrels had to be branded with the whiskey name, producer's name on it. So, it was pretty interesting. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that the history of bourbon and whiskey in America, and it's part of our history. And the thing do you remember in your history class, the Whiskey Rebellion?
Yes.
Oh, good. See, there we go. So the Whiskey Rebellion, they actually used the proceeds and taxes of whiskey to fund the Revolutionary War. So whether you like it or not, whiskey is what made America is when we, America. And that's why it is an American drink, is because it funded and paid for and paid back all the debt for us to gain our independence.
Yeah, the whiskey tax, I think, is what it was really called, or that's what the locals called it anyways.
Yeah, because what they used to do is, they used to be able to produce all these stuff in grain and they'd have the rye, the wheat, the barley, the corn, and they had excess and they didn't know what to do with it. And they didn't really have an exchange of money. So they started, and they, all that stuff goes bad. So they started all the mills that were grinding up everything. They would take all this extra stuff and they would turn it into whiskey because it wasn't like beer where it would go bad.
Right.
They could put it in there. Obviously it stayed for years. So they actually started putting it in there and then they used that as trade. So that's what they did. A lot of this stuff in the beginning is they traded their bourbon for other stuff. And so it was it was a form of currency for them. And so when they came in and they taxed it, these guys were like, man, it's not like we're massive producers or anything like that, but they were taxing them on stuff that would have normally just gone to waste. And so that's what started the whole thing. And they were like, yeah, whatever. And I think it only lasted for 3 or 4 years, but
right.
Either way.
Imagine that the government wanted to tax something.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And that's what started. That's why they were so pissed, is because it was taxation without representation.
Exactly. Yeah. 1791 to 1794.
Look at you go, Mr. Google Fingers.
That's right.
There.
I looked it up.
Jeez, oh man. Okay. I think we have consumed enough of our friends' time listening to us talk about whatever it is that we talked about today.
Apparently.
Now, so we've been on this now for almost an hour. And what I would say to everybody is that we appreciate everybody that's listening. One of the things that makes this cool is we want to be able to talk about the stuff that you guys would like to hear us talk about. So if you have questions or comments, anytime we post up a podcast on our Facebook page and Twitter, wherever it might be, just make sure to, in the comments, if you got a question or a comment, throw it down there. Or you can always shoot us an email to podcast@latentforce.com. podcast@latentforce.com. Shoot an email to us and say, hey, talk about this, or apparently you say apparently too many times.
I'm pretty sure my word is allegedly. I've refrained from it for a couple of weeks now. So
you've done pretty good. I have not. Allegedly, you apparently you allegedly. Yes, that's good. I like it. Well, on that note, I think we will call this an episode. We appreciate everybody tuning in for us for an hour and sitting through all the stuff we covered today. Again, if you have any suggestions or comments, put them in the comments section. If you got any, want to look up any of the stuff we talked about, we'll make sure to put it in the show notes. Podcast@latentforce.com. You can always go to our website, www.latentforce.com. Check us out. Or you can always find us on our Latent Force page on Facebook, Twitter, and also Instagram. We try to keep those things updated. So I appreciate you joining us, and we will catch you on the next one.
See you later, boys and girls.
And that'll be a wrap for this episode of the Latent Force Prepared Defensive Action Podcast. Be sure to give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, or visit our website, www.latentforce.com, so you can get all the latest info from Latent Force. If you have any comments or questions on this episode, or if you have a suggestion for a future show, you can reach us by shooting an email to podcasts@latentforce.com. On behalf of Mike Garza and myself, thank you for joining us. Be safe, and as always, stay in the fight.
Peace out.